Good morning, everyone. I'm Alfred Babo, Professor of Anthropology at Fairfield University in the Department of Sociology and Anthropology in the International Studies program. I'm originally from Côte d'Ivoire in West Africa, a country I left in 2011 when I became a refugee and was helped by Scholar to Risk. After I've been rescued by this organization, in 2020, I joined this organization as a member of its board. I would like to welcome everyone to the Symposium, Conversations from Refugee and Forced Migration field, organized by Share the Platform and sponsored by the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, ISFM, Fairfield University, Clark University, Charles Sturt University, and Proof Media. Share the Platform is an initiative co-founded by 4 people of refugee and non-refugee background, academic and practitioners' expertise on refugee studies, humanitarian action, art, and resettlement. Today, they will serve as facilitator of the panels, starting by myself, Alfred, for the academic, Leora Ken for art, Craig Motley for resettlement, and Anita Fabos for humanitarian aid. We're happy to have you all joining us today, whether you are from a global or local organization, refugee-led organization or not. We invite our audience to let us know either in the chat or via our website, sharetheplatform.org, what organization they belong to. Please join our network to build strong and growing collaboration and partnership that put forward the refugees' expertise. We would like to thank organizations which have already reached out to us to express their interest and support this initiative. At that point, I would like to thank all our panelists, or we call them conversationalists too, for today's conversation. And I would like to give Matthew a time to give some technical aspects.
Hello, everyone, and thank you so much for joining us this morning from all over the world. We're really excited to get this underway. Just a quick few things before we get started on the tech front. We have please feel free to chat with your fellow attendees and with us in general, and ask questions in the chat, as well as we also have a Q&A that you can request questions for down below. You'll see that in your chat in the bar down below, and just obviously in the chat, please keep it professional. Obviously, if there's any no hate speech, or obviously I think we won't really have to worry about that today. But yeah, just keep it professional and on topic, and we should all be great. And we're really looking forward to your questions and your thoughts about the seminar as we go through. And also, just to let everyone know that we are being recorded. So it'll be the panel being recorded, not yourself, but with that said, I'm going to pass it back to Alfred, and I really am looking forward to the conversation today. Thank you.
Thank you, Matthew. So with that being said, let's turn to today's event. What is Share the Platform, and what do we argue? Research on forced migration provides critical input into the way policy related to refugees and forced migration is shaped. Research and the Global Compact on Refugees have pushed for direct engagement and self-representation of refugees in the discussions about their conditions. However, refugees have traditionally been shut out of leadership and decision-making roles, and have all too often only been tokenized or youth for their crisis story. We at Share the Platform believe that by working to center refugee expertise, policy, programs, and practice can be improved. Today, we will be discussing some of the particular ways some of the groups have shifted their approach and shared the platform, put forward the skills and expertise of the refugees in their collaboration with them. The event is comprised of 4 panels that discuss centering refugees in the field of refugee resettlement, arts and culture, humanitarian aid, and academia. Each panel will include a refugee and non-refugee experts in the field. So I would like now to start with the first panel. To help us look at this issue from a few different angles, we are joined today by 2 speakers from both academia and humanitarian practice. Catherine Stimson, who is a member of School at Risk and also the most recent chair of the board. And joining Catherine, I have Aya Atta from London South Bank University, also member of the ISFM. Thank you, Catherine and Aya, for joining us today. We're really honored to have you. So let me go with you on some very general questions. I would like to first spend some time on, as I said, really some general questions, starting with Catherine. Catherine, turning first to you, what are the place and role of refugee scholars in academic work related to refugees and forced migration, refugee studies and forced migration?
It's a great honor to be here, and I want to thank you. And Ayer, it's an honor to be with you. And I want to thank the organizers of Share the Platform for their absolutely necessary work. This webinar is global. Before I answer your question, Alfred, let me tell you where I am geographically. I am in a small town called Southold, built by colonists on the land of the indigenous people, whom we honor here today as well. And Southold is on the North Fork of Long Island. And we have a little square called Einstein Square, named after Einstein, the great physicist who helped shape the world we now live in. Einstein, who was a scholar at risk from Nazi Germany in the 1930s. Einstein, who was sent into exile and, unlike many, found a home in the United States. So as I speak with all of us today, I cannot help but remember that in this little town, Einstein, a German Jew, found refuge from the ravages of Hitler. And let us just think what Einstein gave the world. But to your question, Alfred, my answer is, what don't refugee scholars and people in forced migration, what don't they give their host country? What don't they give us all? First, the refugee scholar brings that profession brings that expertise. I look at you, Alfred, and I think of what you tell us, what you have to teach us. This year, so far, Scholars at Risk has made 94 placements in 13 countries. The engineers bring engineering. The nutritionists bring a knowledge of nutrition. The humanists bring their field. They bring their minds. They bring their training, the capacity for research, the capacity for teaching. But moreover, they make Americans less provincial. They bring global perspectives and global experiences and global languages to a host country. And I would add here that Scholars at Risk is only one of several organizations that is seeking to find places in the academic world for people who have suffered forced exile and refugee status. And third, and I think this is so important, they're moral examples. I am a professor at New York University. I have, so far, a life of comfort. When I think of the bravery and courage of the refugee scholars and the scholars in forced exile, whom I have the privilege to know, I am in the presence of moral courage, of integrity, and of strength. So the term scholars at risk or refugee scholars sometimes makes us think of people who need to be rescued. Well, from danger perhaps. But to me, what refugee scholars bring and those in forced exile, they bring us gifts, intellectual gifts, spiritual gifts, linguistic gifts, and moral gifts. And I believe everyone should be grateful for what these scholars of courage and skill, what they bring students, what they bring colleagues, and what they bring the country. Let me go back to Einstein. Einstein in the Second World War helped to shape policy. He didn't sit there only and do his brilliant mathematics. But I see you, Alfred.
Yeah.
And I see the bust of Einstein about 3 miles from where I sit. And to me, one of the many things for which my country, America, should feel guilty about is not living up to its heritage of welcoming refugees and exiles.
Thank you. I would like to turn to you, Aya, and of course, feel free to comment Catherine's answer. But of course, I would like to ask you the same general question about, how do you think that refugee scholars' expertise and competencies are generally valued, in the field of teaching, research, in academia?
Well, first of all, hello to everyone, really to the panelists and everyone watching and see me and hear me. I'm really, and it's just an honor, really, and glad to be part of this panel. And I would like, as a way of introducing myself and answer your question, just to thank a few people that really helped me to make the journey, be like an academic journey from, let's say, 2009. That's the year that I can put in my CV, and I remember really well. First, I start with really my fellow conversationist panelists that later today, Christina Clark Kazak, who initially put the suggestion and invited me to be part of today's event, and I'm sure it will stay in my CV. And she's obviously a president of ISFM, and I admire and learned a lot for 2 years when I worked part of her team. And of course, again, a familiar face, Anita Fabus, my brilliant first lecturer, forced migration studies, and my mentor, really. She introduced me to ISFM, first ISFM conference in Cyprus, Nicosia. I still have those pictures. When I look at them, I feel younger, and that is fantastic. And of course, the journey started from there at the University of East London, and then continued. It gave me the aspiration and the dream project that I really wanted to do. That was my, went on to do my PhD in forced migration studies, the whole history, and more specifically, refugee integration and my own community, Kurdish diaspora integration experience in London. And I did a webinar only 2 weeks ago. I'm quite fresh. Later it comes. I will give you a few examples of what refugee integration means and what I think as a refugee, if you like, or a scholar from refugee background can bring in to the field. But I know that at this the last minute, Gayam Keber, my first supervisor, couldn't be. Therefore, I'm really feeling a big shoe. I'm sure he's generous and forgiving for me to be talking just at least on his behalf. I wish he could have been here, but he's, I know, forgiving. I can then have a word. I say, well, I said what I did, obviously, to give a fair voice to the refugee voice, if you like. And of course, I am curious as a researcher. I looked at the video by Catherine Stimson, my fellow panelist today, that I just watched that video in the space of 5 minutes. I learned a lot. Catherine, you talked in a video, 12th of March 2018, you gave a talk about women in revolt, 1968-2018, New York University. And you talked about the Italian feminists dressing beautifully and an army of witnesses for equality. I'm really, again, honored to be talking to you today and hearing what you have to say.
Thank you,
about refugee contribution. And I think I am to say that forced migrant in general could be treated, and I see the whole thousands of scholars and forced migrants as army of witnesses marching for equality in this world, in this divided world. And of course, thank again, Alfred Babu for your kind introduction. And again, a new face, but you are talking about the familiar theme that it is close to my heart, to my mind. And this is again a great opportunity to continue this partnership and conversation about the great topic of our time. And I might thank again to the whole admin team and especially Matthew Walser, who prepared me really in a month before all this event, and then lots of work goes into preparing such an event. This is in itself a positive example on how organic academic, those who really care about people and about knowledge and those who really care about understanding issues, current issues, and the history of problems that we had in the past 100 years or so. So it comes into light and then gives voice to people and voices of refugees. I am only one voice, a voice among many, many others. And again, it's important. This is in itself is a symposium, is a conversation that is positive, is meaningful, and I hope this is not a one-off. The others will follow, and we all continue this conversation wherever we are, and we invite in people, men, women, young, I don't know, those more established with experience, so we share knowledge. As specifically now, I know I gave a really long introduction because this is how I wanted to come into the debate as fully who I am and feel about today. My own experience as a refugee, as a scholar, is quite limited as someone who just entered and completed my PhD in 2017. Therefore, I really didn't have much time as an established scholar. I was banging on doors, small doors and bigger ones. And before I was about to make more progress, then we had the pandemic and lockdown. Therefore, really it worked against me and many, many others newly emerged and people I know that from, again, refugee and migrant background who couldn't really make it into any established university, for example, to get a permanent job or something. But however, as I am from using my resilience from my refugeehood, if you like, I knew that through the networking, through hard work again, and through the goal that I had, the social networking that I have within migrant and refugee communities, I made it to really have good go at London School of Economics, Middlesex University, where I studied before. And again, I kept in touch with London South Bank University, who really gave me that platform again to do jobs and to link with masters and PhD scholars. So I'm in the field. I think there are things that needs to improve. There are things that we all collectively can do better, but so far so good. And I think with the two-way system that we all have, refugee or people like myself, doing their best, their bit, and doing their homework, but the opportunities are there with people like yourself and others in this panel that we need to make improvement so that we all the ways is inclusive, included in any project, and then we all equal around the table.
Okay. Thank you. I just want to let know those who are joining the panel right now that this panel is about how refugee scholars expertise are generally valued in the field of research and teaching. So I would like to ask the audience, if anyone has a question, please don't hesitate to send your question using the Q&A. And in the meantime, I would like to continue with you and come back to you, Catherine. You were recently the chair of School at Risk. So this organization helps refugees, of course, as you presented, to be hosted in a higher education institution for a little time, and so where they can continue teaching and doing research. So to focus on only School at Risk particular experience of integrating refugees, what is your experience of integrating those refugee scholars, exiled scholars into the body of decision of School at Risk? What is the experience of that? Do you want to share that with us?
I'd be very happy. I'd be very happy to. And I've seen in the chat that there's one gentleman who would like to have the discussion be clearer. And I would say to this gentleman, ask me in the chat if I need to clarify what I'm saying, or if my points seem obscure, or if my accent is incomprehensible, which it very well might be. So I would appreciate, Samuel Baba, I would appreciate your help in making myself understood. The question I've been asked is, what lay behind the decision of Scholars at Risk to add Scholars at Risk themselves to our board?
Yeah.
Let me just remind us all that, like many organizations in the United States, Scholars at Risk is a nonprofit organization, not a government organization, a nonprofit organization. And legally, it is to have a board of directors that has financial and legal responsibility. And who do you want on the board? People that can help the organization and people that understand our mission. And they can help us in very specific ways. For example, one thing that Scholars at Risk struggle against, and Alfred and AR, you can speak to this far more personally than I, the visa issue. The visa issue. What do you have to do in order to be in a country? We need people on our board who could help with that. Not that they could tell the United States government to do what we wanted, just like that. But what we really wanted and why we were thrilled that Alfred consented to join the board was this. In order to do its job, the board needed two kinds of knowledge. One kind of knowledge was, what is it like to be a refugee scholar, a scholar at risk? On the ground knowledge. A parallel. If Scholars at Risk was a health organization, we would want doctors on the board. But we are here to help refugee scholars subject to forced migration. We need people on the board who know the subject, who understand the mission, not in theory, but in practice. So we needed that kind of knowledge. The second kind of knowledge we needed was general human wisdom. The ability to make choices about how much of the budget should go on this project, how much on this project. Was this project really useful? But the general wisdom that all good governance demands. So when we were thinking about new board members, it was, as we say, a no-brainer to ask our scholars to serve on the board. And we were thrilled when Alfred accepted the invitation. And when Naila Al-Atrash, this great Syrian theater director in exile, when she accepted the invitation to serve on our board. It seemed the very least we could, it was for our benefit, sharing the platform. And Anita, I think you would agree with me. Sharing the platform is not just for the refugee scholars or the scholars in exile. Sharing the platform is for the benefit of the other people on the platform. I learn an enormous amount from Alfred and Isla. The organization is better. In all our search for diversity, the organization is better because we have the double wisdom of people who have been there as scholars at risk.
Thank you, Catherine. I'm going back to Aya. So in terms of probably personal experience, we don't have a lot of time remaining. I assume we can go for the whole day, but we have other panels coming. So I would like just to hear from your any personal experience about how you have been, for example, involved in something where you have to be, leading a program of research or, a teaching thing or a committee at your university, something related to your personal experience or some other scholars, refugee scholars who have been at the leading positions as Catherine was explaining.
Yeah, I appreciate the contribution and the information that Catherine shared is quite specific to supporting scholars from refugee background. I came across similar, obviously, much the project that established in 1930s, CARA, that obviously there is also in partnership, close partnership with SAR. I know they based at London South Bank University.
Yes.
I happened to attend a few of their meetings, and I appreciate what they've been doing since 1930s, really, to support refugee academics from Germany, from elsewhere, to flee persecution and get protection and accommodation, for example, in England and elsewhere. I think we're talking about the context of the Cold War. That was necessary, that was slightly different, and I agree with it. And I think anyone, an artist, an academic, a woman activist, anyone in any part of the world need protection, need to be protected. That's the most, I think, obvious human approach. If we can persuade the states, don't label people, don't categorize them, don't marginalize them,
Yes.
and accept them for who they are. And as you mentioned, people are people. They bring in skills, abilities, languages, and they add rather than take away.
Absolutely.
With that, just a general introduction on the way I approach refugee protection. I can, as a Londoner, if you like, I have done that my journey from decision, from camp, journey, reception, settlement. I feel I'm a citizen now. I claim to be a Kurdish Londoner, and I speak for thousands, not only third generation, my own, but second generation. For how long people are labeled as this and that is up to individuals, up to groups to then to negotiate, do with roots are double OTS respected, understanding, and also then and then understand their roots as ROUTS that we were much clearer about. So I think my when I see myself in a meeting in a voluntary sector where I am working quite an activist and quite alone, and also when London School of Economics talked about diversity and bringing people from refugee background, if you like, or migrant background, and first I objected. My initial contribution to that meeting was, so I'm a Londoner. Although I know I have that experience, of course, but I'm a Londoner. I need to be counted as a Londoner first, but then the languages that I speak, the experiences that I have, that is also work for me, not necessarily something that I am different, or we all know that we all need to be recognized for who we are and how we have changed and evolved and then contribute to a new society. But of course, we understand that that's important, that in America, in Europe, there are people who obviously from diaspora communities also proud of their origin, and that nothing against that. But if people are labeled, that is what I am against labeling, against marginalization. But again, as equals, human beings, people who have skills. In my case, I've done my PhD as equal as anyone else's, and I can speak 2-3 languages, so I can understand the suffering. When I work with refugee children, I understand their resilience, I understand their sense of humor, and I understand their dream about the future to become an artist, a dentist, a businessman, or whoever. Then when I speak in Croydon Council meeting and I defend diversity, obviously my words carry more weight because I have done that. I have been there. Don't see this man as a young person coming here as a victim, problem, needing things. This is temporary. They need support, they need protection, and therefore then they see them as future citizens. I think this is how my approach, in a positive way, that I really knock on doors and sometimes break them if they don't open it. So in a peaceful way, in a way that they can negotiate. Therefore, I have been really successful in many ways with universities, with Mayor of London, the London Assembly, for example. I attended as a refugee voice. And that is a two-way system. You need to be proactive. If you find the right support, people in London by and large support you. But I have seen that way, two-way system in a positive way working for me and many others that I know around us. I'm talking about London, slightly different from other probably capitals in Europe or smaller cities. But I am a positive person naturally, and I have seen so far many good examples. But by no way is enough. We need to be working together, that men, women, from refugee migrant background, and then everyone else's working together, and we speak with one voice.
Okay. Thank you very much to my two panelists. As I said a couple minutes ago, it's too short but we really appreciate your input and your thoughts. We got some questions from the audience, so just to let you know that we're really interacting with the audience. But so far the questions are kind of really directed to share the platform, and thank you, Lauren. So people want to know how what kind of partnership Share the Platform is looking for. So I guess by the end of this webinar, we can have different angles. The first one that we're talking about right now is the academic. So I would like to thank again Aya and Catherine for your time. We're going to so please stay tuned for the next panel. Thank you again. Thank you for your time. Thank you for being with us.
Thank you, Alfred.
Thank you.
Thank you, Alfred.
Very good to meet you, Ayer. Good to meet you.
Likewise, thank you.
Hi, everybody. I want to thank you for joining us. And this panel is a shift. We're going from scholars to artists. And my name is Leora Khan. I'm Director of Proof. So joining us today for our conversation is Cal Cullen, who's founder and director of Wavepool, which is a community-driven and artist-led program. And Madeline Dambakua, hope I said that right, Madeline, who was born in Zimbabwe and is living in Cincinnati. And just a little bit about Madeline, she wears many hats, including being a gifted international visual artist, a chef, and she teaches at University of Cincinnati, and she is on the board of WavePool. So we are looking at this conversation to show how WavePool, it's representational, sort of an unusual organization, and they work with artists of immigrants and refugee backgrounds in the community. So having that introduction, I would love to ask you to really talk together about how we're really pushing this agenda about sharing best practices on integrating the work that the center does with artists of refugee and immigrant backgrounds and how it does. So I'm going to send it over to you too.
Hi, thanks so much, Leora. Hey, Madeline. Yeah, so I mean, WavePool is a very grassroots organization. We're artist-led, as you mentioned, and we've always been very collaborative in our approach with neighbors and immigrants and refugees and other artists. I mean, I would say we're not just sharing the platform, we're actually co-building the platform with the folks that this center is intended to serve. A few years ago, I'll give you a brief origin story, and I can actually share some images because we're artists and we're very visual. A few years ago, we started offering art classes in collaboration with a refugee service organization locally. And it was really incredible what the visual arts can do to cement a community and build friendships, and also transcend language barriers. And very quickly, actually, it went from one class a week to 4 times a week they were meeting and developing projects that they could get commissions for, teaching classes, and they wanted their own space. So we were able to luckily secure storefront next door, and they helped build the entire space. They envisioned the layout, they helped develop the Welcome brand and logo. The Welcome Project is the name of this storefront and this project. And we made our own wallpaper for the center. And basically transformed this storefront into what is now 2 storefronts, one focused on arts and crafts and making and selling goods, and the other focused on food and culinary endeavors. And this is us opening the center for the new kitchen. We have a teaching kitchen and food market there, which it's just such a lovely space. And it's really been like kind of built together. So now we have cooking classes and art classes, and we're able to employ the refugee and immigrants that we work with to teach these classes and build leadership skills and kind of act as an incubator. Yeah, so Madeline started working with us a couple years ago, doing an art exhibition. Let me stop sharing this for a moment. And we haven't been able to part ways since. So Madeline is now on our board, but you can explain more of what you've done with us, Madeline. I know you've taught classes and all kinds of things.
Yes, and I also want to kind of like show the other side of what we do at WavePool, both as artists but also as immigrants. What the organization has helped us to do, it has helped us to actually have intercultural exchanges where there's this functional multiculturalism that we share together. And there's also an integration of a society of immigrants into the larger culture. But what also the arts helps us to do, the arts helps us also to engage in the larger culture by also bringing our culture and our heritage into Cincinnati. So we have managed to use our transferable skills. For instance, I was not able to teach art at a college in Cincinnati. So when I came to WEFPU and to the Welcome Project, and now with also Owning Your Own Voice, another program that we are doing, and I'm a mentor in that program, we have also been able to share our stories, and our stories really make who we are. And when we share our stories, it also gives us a voice. And when we share our art, it also brings our thoughts and our voices to the communities that we live in. So I always share at the Welcome Project that the Welcome Project has done so much for me in a way that I feel welcome in Cincinnati. Before I met Cal, before I started collaborating with WEFPU and the Welcome Project, I was kind of like an artist who was in an island by myself. And talking also to other artists that we work with, they also felt the same way. And now we actually feel like we have this in-group, this community that strengthens us. And at the same time as well, when Carl showed a picture of a recipe book, that recipe book is a recipe book where immigrant chefs have written their own recipes in the book. And I also participated and wrote an immigrant recipe in there, which is my grandmother's recipe. My grandmother used to cook butternut squash, and she used to put peanut butter in it. And these recipes were not written before because my grandmother could not read, nor could she write. So now to be in Cincinnati as an immigrant and to actually put a voice to my grandmother's cooking. So when I am a chef and I'm sharing food from Zimbabwe, I am bringing the heritage of Zimbabwe, yes. And sometimes kids actually, they impress me a lot because they actually think I've flown from Zimbabwe and I have come to teach them from Zimbabwe. In particular, the child in purple in this picture, she was actually thinking I flew from Zimbabwe to come and teach them. So this is the kind of work that we do and we share. And it happens all the time, whether I'm teaching writing or I'm teaching art, it's always, it feels like that.
And this is an image of Madeline doing the Owning Your Own Voice project that she mentioned, which really is directed at non-refugee and immigrant women in our community that are dealing with trauma, a lot of sex trafficking. But through Madeline's voice, she's been able to coach and mentor and really empower these other women, which is so amazing to kind of blur the boundaries and the barriers between the immigrant community and the other folks in our neighborhood that also have issues. And I think, Madeline, what you were saying about feeling like an artist on an island is so interesting because it's how a lot of artists feel. And despite the kind of normal cliche of artists wanting to be by themselves in their studio all the time, it's actually, most of the artists I know, they want to be part of something bigger than themselves. They want to be contributing and connecting and feeding back into the community. We do a project called, we have lots of refugees in Cincinnati, mostly from Nepal, and we do a project called the Welcome Editions, which really is all about taking well-known artists and allowing their platform to empower and uplift the local immigrant and refugee artists we have here. So this is the most recent edition we've done. So basically, we're working with the artist Jeffrey Gibson for this one. We've done 5 in the past. And Jeffrey Gibson, you know, he's an art star. He's had solo shows at the Brooklyn Museum and all over the world. And the refugees that are working on this project are from Nepal. They used to weave in the refugee camps in Nepal, and they're able to use their skills, getting paid a living wage to collaborate with this artist. And Jeffrey designed the interior with the text, but then the outside is totally up to them. And so they're able to really feel like collaborators. They both sign the piece, Jeffrey and the refugee that we're working with, and their story is highlighted equally. And these pieces are actually going to be in the Armory show in New York in September, which is so exciting that we get to really highlight local refugee stories on that kind of big international stage. This is our storefront now. So it's really transformed from that shuttered venue you saw earlier.
And I wanted also to kind of like talk about the socioeconomic impact. Before I met with Carl and with the Welcome Project, it was very difficult for me to, first of all, sell my artworks, but also to be paid for a skill that is transferable and that is good, but I couldn't do that without working together with others. So what that also helps us as immigrants is it helps us to have, it's almost like having an extra income, and you can actually feel the impact of having a sense of belonging, but at the same time also having this sense of value that you can use your skills, you can use your gift, and then apart from enjoying it, you are paid for doing it. And so it feels like you're actually being paid for sharing your culture and sharing who you are. And most of us, we come from a collectivism culture where really functioning within a community, it means a lot to us. So when I go and I teach, and I am paid for teaching art, and I'm teaching landscape, and people are welcoming drawing a Zimbabwean landscape, that's so fulfilling and enriching, and it also helps us to feel at home. So we have a home away from home.
This is really great. I love what you're doing. It's very unique. Can you talk about more? I would love to hear more how you co-build with the refugees in program design. You know, how are decisions made in this process?
Yeah, I mean, pretty much all of it is based off of the skills and the interests that the refugee artists have, tied to the needs and desires of the community that may be taking the programs or classes. So we try and look for natural connections, you know, whether it's a weaving class or a painting class or a cooking class, trying to figure out how to fill the gaps. The main reason we opened the market, and I think this is a really good example, is twofold. It's one, because the immigrant and refugee community we're working with has such amazing culinary skills and can tell their story through cooking, as Madeline was saying. And that's something that I think really needs to be highlighted, and it builds this multiculturalism and this appreciation in our city. but also because our neighborhood in Camp Washington is a food desert and has been for decades now. And so trying to, foster healthy eating and getting some fresh produce to our neighbors is really important too. So, and something the neighborhood's been asking for a long time. So we're able to kind of tackle two issues at once, helping the immigrants and refugees connect and be empowered and tell their story, while also feeding our neighborhood.
And also, I want to kind of like add to this. Carl is a very good listener, and it makes a big difference because she welcomes new ideas. So in implementing programs, a number of us have gone to Carl and say, hey, Carl, I am able to do this, or I have this skill. And most of the time Carl is like, oh, so do you want to make a program out of that? Or do you want to teach that? And sometimes Carl will also match people's skills with different programs. And sometimes I might come with a program and say, hey, Carl, I'm thinking about teaching poetry, and I'm teaching people's voices. And Carl might be able to say, oh yeah, we already have a program that we are offering. Do you want to be a part of that? That's how I became a mentor for the owning your own voice. So really the programs are people oriented and are people's ideas.
It's very organic. I feel like the whole wave pool in general is just kind of, people ask all the time, like, how does this all happen? And it's just based on listening and then trying to be creative about how we pair things together. Yeah. Yeah,
it's literally a wave pool where, think about like casting a stone in the water and then the waves keep on expanding itself. That's exactly what we do with our immigrant community and with the Cincinnati community.
And do you, I mean, this is a very unique approach. So when I was looking for panelists, to do this or share the conversation, it was hard to find a organization that was doing a collaborative, as you said, what did we say it was? Not share the platform, but
building.
In the chat, you can see people say, why don't we do co-building instead of platform? But it's very unique, and it was hard to find an organization that's doing that with refugee backgrounds and non-refugee backgrounds and immigrant backgrounds. So can you, given this uniqueness, and I don't think we have any questions from the audience, but
there's one in the Q&A actually. I can read and answer if you want me to, or you can go ahead and we'll get to it later.
Oh yeah, go ahead, because I don't see any questions.
It just says, I'd like to know how immigrants find out about Wave Pool and where do we publicize? And to answer that, we work with a lot of partners. So there's an organization locally called Cincinnati Compass that kind of works as a network of immigrant organizations, and they are, they're a partner and also help publicize, put people in touch with us. When we started Welcome, we were partnering with Heartfelt Tidbits, which is another refugee organization. And at the beginning, they were really our only partner on this project. And now we have many more. Refugee Connect too is another one we work with closely.
Yeah, Heartfelt Tidbits is great. Put that in the chat if you can.
Yeah.
And just, we have a few more minutes left, but I would love, if we don't have other questions, I'd like to hear how in this unique approach, do you want to address like any difficulties or to this approach that that's happened with you?
Yeah, I mean, it can be confusing and chaotic at times to like, and I think surprising for some people too, that, are asking, like for the market, for example, like, well, what are you doing? Like, what kind of things are you stocking? And I'm like, we don't know. We're figuring it out with you. Like, let's figure this out together. So that's the challenge, I think, is really like getting people to feel confident in taking those leadership roles. But it usually doesn't take long to get through that. But that's always something that comes up.
And I think what also helps us is a sense of ownership. When you are coming to a program and you have a sense of ownership, it's very easy for me to walk in and see what is needed versus not just me coming in and wanting to get from the program. So I think when it comes to leadership skills, I think a lot of us are kind of like coming out of our shells, because at first it's almost like, is this really happening in Cincinnati? People are actually cooking in Cincinnati, and I can cook my home food and people will enjoy it. I remember when I participated in the Ish Festival that I received an email. I also teach at Cincinnati State College, and I received an email from our president saying, this is impressive. How did you get to do this? So there's also that factor that people don't know us and don't know our skills. So there's also that side that even though there could be some challenges, like what can I do with my skills? Once people get the opportunity, then they get to actually show who they are and shine.
That's beautiful. Cal, do you want to add on to that?
I mean, I think Madeline summed it up beautifully. It's like, it really is. It might be challenging at the beginning, but the fruits are just so lovely of going through this process and like just bringing people on board as teammates and co-owners. And it's just, yeah, a really great way to work.
I mean, I think it's interesting because Ayera said at the end of his conversation about how people with lived experiences really, really know how it's going to affect them. And I think what Madeline was saying was so beautifully put in, not in the, in terms of the scholarship, but in terms of art and, cooking, I think is art. And so I think, these panels might seem not so connected, but they are connected in such a great way, whether it's going to be scholars or it's going to be humanitarians. And to show that, refugee and immigrant-led projects in the different disciplines are basically the same. It's, you need to hear the voices, and the collaborative projects really work. Are there other questions from the audience? I don't see any here. Alfred, did you want to ask a question? You said we wonder why some refugees are hesitant to lead. Has that happened with you, Cal, that you see people holding back because?
Yeah, I mean, specifically with the some of the Nepali women we work with, I think they're mostly housewives. They're not used to being in a position of power or of like being valued for their voice and their story. And so that took years of process in order to get some of those women comfortable to teach or to feel like their art is good enough to show or to sell. But it was, such an amazing process to build these friendships and to not only teach them skills, but to have them teach us skills too, because they're coming here with art skills that are just phenomenal, and I don't think that they realize it.
There's a question in the chat, which is really important, on how COVID has impacted the work.
Yeah, good question. Yeah, I mean, so that new market space opened February 29th, 2020. So it was right before complete lockdown happened. And so we very quickly pivoted, as we do. We're creative thinkers, and we became a food and art delivery service out of that space for our neighborhood. And we're able to employ, through donations, artists to include artwork with the grocery boxes for our neighbors. So it became just as much of a mental health project and a project that supports artists that maybe have lost work, as it is about feeding and getting the food out. So there's been a lot of transitions. Our Cincinnati Table program, which is our monthly community dinner program, which is where that recipe cookbook comes from, that basically had to shut down, and we transitioned to a frozen food line. It's like just a lot, we started doing cooking classes online, which has its own challenges. Things have been impacted greatly. We weren't able to have our in-person art classes for a while. So, but now things are opening up again, and it seems very hopeful, so.
So I wanna is there any other, we have 2 more minutes and we have to wrap this up, but is there anything else that you wanna say lastly to sort of get people excited about the art world and refugee and immigrant experiences co-building together?
I mean, I think that, of course, being an artist, I always think art is the answer, but art is just such a multicultural experience that really transcends every barrier. I mean, it's such a way to make an impact, and people gravitate to it. It's really is a platform to amplify stories and voices, and share skills. And yeah, I'm happy to share with anyone offline that wants to chat about programs or ideas. I'm always up for brainstorming and thinking through collaborations. So thank you, Leora.
You're welcome, Madeline. Any last more inspiring words that you haven't already said to us during this conversation?
Yes, and just like Carl said, we really believe that we are really at a watershed where art can be used to impact immigrant lives, and not only just art in the sense of visual arts, but all forms of arts. Storytelling is powerful, because we become what we are, and we build our cultures through story, through language. So the way we tell our stories and the perspectives that we tell our stories is very impactful. And what I hope people will utilize more is our Owning Your Own Voice program. Because when you own your own voice, first of all, when you find your voice, you find yourself. And when you find yourself, then you can operate in this dimension where your voice helps you to shift the atmosphere. And when you show up, you are not just showing up as a refugee, you are not just showing up as an immigrant, but you are showing up as a voice. And we know that anytime any voice is silenced, if women's voices are silenced, then women are not going to be where they are supposed to be. If immigrants' voices are silenced, then they are not going to be where they are supposed to be. So I think the most impactful thing that we are probably going to have in Cincinnati is to use that platform to tell our stories. And now in the digital age, these stories are also going to become permanent. So now we cannot have immigrants that will say, well, I didn't have a platform to tell my story. Now we have a platform where everyone can tell their stories, but we also have a platform of art where everyone can express themselves.
So well put. And thank you to the both of you for this amazing conversation. And thank everyone for watching this. You're going to be taking a 5-minute break, and we will be, and hopefully you will enjoy watching our entertainment during that and we will be back with Anita and company afterwards. Also, please remember to use the chat to talk to us, tell us where you're from, any comments, and then also there's a Q&A. Thank you everybody for listening to this, and we'll be back soon.
يا حبيبي حبيبي تعال تعال نتلم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم أنا ذنبي إيش شيلوني هم يا حبيبي حبيبي المانجا والتفاح حبيبي عسل والناس مساح حبيبي المانجا والتفاح حبيبي عسل والناس مساح حبيبي عسل والناس مساح أهاجر لك عشان ارتاح يا حبيبي حبيبي تعال تعال نتلم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم أنا ذنبي إيش شيلوني هم يا حبيبي حستناك أنا في البحر محل الطير هاجر رحل حستناك أنا في البحر محل الطير هاجر رحل محل الطير هاجر رحل أنت من هنا ولا من زحل يا حبيبي حبيبي تعال تعال نتلم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم أنا ذنبي إيش شيلوني هم يا حبيبي حبيبي تعال نبل الشوق شوق نسكن لندن عمارات فوق حبيبي تعال نبل الشوق شوق نسكن لندن عمارات فوق نسكن لندن عمارات فوق عشان خاطر الحب والذوق يا حبيبي حبيبي تعال تعال نتلم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم مدام الريد اختلط بالدم أنا ذنبي إيش شيلوني هم يا حبيبي حستناك عن طريق القاش حبيبي ذهب والناس نحاس حستناك عن طريق القاش حبيبي ذهب والناس نحاس حبيبي ذهب والناس نحاس الريدة كده ولا بلاش 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 الريدة
Hello, everyone. So my name is Craig Mortley, and I'm one of the co-founders of Share the Platform. I'm a refugee as well as a refugee practitioner. Thank you for joining us. For all those who have continued with us from the previous panel, thank you for being with us for this very important discussion. Today, in our conversation, you will hear from the refugee and refugee resettlement field. I have with me my two friends, Drusilla and Halima, who will engage in conversation as practitioners in how they have integrated refugee voices in the work that they do. Drusilla, like myself, is from a refugee background. She is the executive director of Bridge Refugees in Knoxville, Tennessee. Along with her team, she provides comprehensive resettlement and integration support to newcomers in the Knoxville area. And Halima is the monitoring and evaluation coordinator for refugee resettlement and integration at Church World Services. Welcome to you both, Drusilla and Halima, to this conversation. We're going to start off with brief questions to the two, and then we'll engage in some conversations. So starting with Halima, can you tell me a little bit about what Share the Platform means to you and how you have engaged this concept in your work?
Definitely. Hi, Craig. Hi, Drusilla. I'm happy to join the conversation and to learn and speak with you all. What does Share the Platform mean for me? I think that I appreciate, first of all, what Cal said as far as like collaborating and co-sharing and not sharing the platform. I totally appreciated that perspective. I think it's first important to recognize that in this like field or space of forced migration, whether it's in academia, humanitarian affairs, providing like protection or advocating, such work is like wholly dependent upon the actual existence of like forced migrants. So I think that there's a relationship there. And I think that that's definitely interesting to kind of have that positionality that like all of the work that I do and my colleagues we do is solely dependent upon having people to work with, right? For better, for worse. So I think that that's important to note. I look at sharing the platform as basically not a share, but centering the broad spectrums of like various newcomer and refugee voices and their participation within every single aspect of the work that we do. So anywhere decisions are being made, policy is being developed, programs are being developed, that's essentially where people's voice should be. And I don't think it should just be a token voice or one or two voices or the loudest voice. I think it should be a broad spectrum and diverse voices, because I also believe that like everyone, there's nuance and diversity within forced migration. There's not one voice. People come with their own experiences, and having all of those are deeply important in that process. So I see it as, looking at it from every aspect. So it should be, these things should be incorporated within advocacy, communications, strategy and planning, leadership, fundraising, program management, service provision. Again, if this is what we're working for, it should be representative of the people, their personal goals, interests and experiences, and what they determine is the best for them. I think it should actually be switched, like not what governments and private sector believe is integration, but how people want to best live out their goals and aspirations, and then supporting them in how they wish to do that. So that's kind of how I see sharing the platform in general.
Thank you for sharing that perspective. And we're seeing coming up in the comments as well as in the conversation just had with you. The concept of co-producing, of co-creating with refugees, not just adding their voices into the established or the dominant narrative that's out there. So Drusilla, as a person from a refugee background and as somebody who you would say as part of the establishment that is engaged in refugee resettlement and integration, tell us what the shared platform means to you and how does your experiences as somebody from a forced migration background influences and impact how you integrate refugee voices in the work that you do.
Thank you, Craig, and hello, everyone, and thank you for inviting. For me, share the platform means a lot because one time I was silenced for 9 months, and I was a public figure. I couldn't speak and express myself and views. Now I can represent refugees, empower them, bring them around the table. We share the same air we breathe. We share the same values. Most of the time they see refugees and immigrants as takers. We are also givers. So it's kind of a win-win situation. We want to create a win-win situation when all of us around the table, we talk about the needs, the challenges, the talents, what everybody has, because I believe that every single person, even if you don't speak the language in the country you are settling in, you have values, you have richness in you, and the whole world needs those ones. It's a matter of awakening them, being empowered, and be listened to. I liked what Madalena said, listen to, and appreciate what other people have. So for me, I see this as a platform where all the stakeholders get together and they share about things they care about, because we are adding values. Everybody adds value to this world, no matter the status you have, because being labeled as a refugee or as an immigrant or as a citizen, we are all human beings, and we have to humanize all the things we do together. So this is how I do see the platform, and I'm glad that in diversity and the growth, I can see the growth and what we'll achieve together, and I'm very excited about that.
Thank you, Drusilla. Underscoring, a point that I made about seeing refugees as humans, their individuality, the experiences that they come with, and not just as persons from forced migration, is an important piece in pivoting the conversations and pivoting how refugee voices are viewed and the expertise that they come with. Like the previous panel, you both had some previous engagements before this discussion. So tell us a little bit about how that came about between the two of you, and then we'll get into a brief conversation between Halima and Drusilla. You can go ahead, Drusilla.
Halima, go ahead.
Oh, okay. Thank you, Craig. So essentially, so in my role at CWS or Church World Service, Church World Service has and continuously tries to be intentional about lifting up or centering refugee or immigrant voices and their experiences and their needs and their rights within program administration and its advocacy. As you mentioned, Craig, Drusilla is the director at Bridge Refugees in Tennessee. That is one of CWS's former partners, who essentially, we have partners all across the US that actually do the work of supporting newcomers and providing them services and support. So as one of our partners, I became acquainted with Drusilla by working with her and her staff. And my job is like helping them support the services and providing targeted assistance and support. I also became aware of Drusilla and her leadership as a representative with the Refugee Congress, of which she can speak more about. And so in 2018, CWS awarded Drusilla its annual Champion for Change Award. And this award really highlights leadership and innovation and resilience and just collaboration within like the newcomer community. And so Drusilla was awarded that, that honor for her positivity, for her leadership, her advocacy and service to her community and her continued work in fighting for newcomers in her community. And so that's how our relationship came about, and why I thought she would be like a brilliant person to kind of speak about her experiences and the importance of sharing the platform.
And I appreciate for you reaching out, Halima. It was a great honor and I was humbled to accept the invitation.
Awesome. Thank you both. So let's dive a little bit deeper into our conversation. So we talked a little bit about what Share the Platform means to you. Tell us a little bit about how you're seeing refugee voices showing up in the field, in the work that you're doing.
So for people who do not know about me, I'm Drusilla. I'm originally from Rwanda and I fled in 2008. As a former member of parliament and the government of Rwanda, I was hoping that my skills and experience were a passport for me to get a good job when I come to America. But it was not, unfortunately, it was not that way. So I started my first employment as a production sales associate at Goodwill Industries for $6.55. But that doesn't let me knock me down. I just always worked hard to seek for opportunities to grow. So we have a big University of Tennessee in my town. And when I saw that, I said, oh my gosh, this is my place. But people were seeing my resume and they said that I was overqualified. Same from my husband, who was a banker for 12 years. And they were always telling that we are overqualified. For him, he couldn't find a teller position, let alone a friend from church who learned about us, connected him to a banker, and he went to the bank to be a teller. Just was an entry-level position as well. So when I started to think about how I can grow and help other refugees grow and be around the table. So what I do mostly, which is related to the shared platform, I educate, I advocate, and I mobilize resources to help refugees. But most of the time, I want refugees' voices to be heard. And in that regard, the previous work I had before I go into Bridge Refugee Services, I was working with Cherokee Health Systems as a multicultural outreach coordinator and helping with interpretation services as well. But when this position was opened, they asked me to come on the panel of interviewers. And they didn't find the right candidate. And then I said, I'm capable to do this. I have management and I can build good relationship and advocate for people. And then I applied for the position in 2015. At that level, the organization I'm leading was really about to close the doors and people were discouraging me to go even to be in this position. I said, no, I go where the problems are. I know I can build this. And then I started, Madeline emphasized about the power of stories. I started to ask case managers, what are the stories of refugees? I want to use these stories to educate so people can know why refugees are coming here and what they are bringing around the tables in the communities. And then we started to do that. And Halima talked about fundraising. For the first time, Bridge was created in 1982. I created a fundraising department, because the refugee settlement is a public and private partnership. But why many nonprofits did close the doors for the past years, it's because they heavily depend on government grants. But when we started the fundraising department and selling the refugee story, we started to see the income, private donation coming. And during COVID, I can tell you, I did receive more money than anybody, I think, for our clients. They didn't miss any, even for the virtual learning, we kept continuing having enough support. So this is what I was showing, that even if I was not trained here in America, I had to show that I can lead an organization and the organization can succeed. Other things which I care about is building refugee leadership. And before we didn't have refugees' voices on our board. Now we have 2 representatives on the board. We have one from Congo, from Rwanda, and we have another one from Iraq. And that will continue, and we want to make sure that they are also empowered. In my capacity as a director, when there are trainings which are there through the Alliance for Better Nonprofit, for example, and I see what can help them, I just refer them to those training. I think the shared platform and what we do as resettlement agencies really is like bringing those voices and the talent. So I want to tell you also that one of our priorities is evidence-based service to the client. Because if the federal government, they define early employment as the way to go to those self-sufficient, we have to see what the clients need. This is why we created support groups, so the refugees themselves can exchange experiences. And also we had like women's group, for example, who needed the sewing program. And then we did post on Facebook that we needed sewing machine, and we started the women's group. So I'm very proud of the refugees' voices, and this is how I became also part of the Refugee Congress. I remember when I started to become a director, Church World Service approached me to see if I can become a delegate from Tennessee to the Refugee Congress, which is a national led by refugees and for refugees advocacy organization. We are pro well-being of refugees, asylees, asylum seekers, and other vulnerable migrants. And we want to be around all those tables. I am also an engaged community leader. It's like yesterday we were talking about workforce development in my city, and there was somebody from the Chamber of Commerce. I have had some inquiries about people who are skilled and trained here who want to spend 1 year according to their visa status and provide some skills to our communities. And I said, hey, what are the companies in my city who can help those skilled immigrants to provide services? And she said, I didn't know about this, but I will do research about that. I became like an immigrant and refugee ambassador. There is one article that said that. So I think this is really a great platform, and I'm very engaged and very emotioned by this, because when I was about to go to apply for Bridge Refugee Services, this is what I knew about Upward Global that helps skilled immigrant and refugees to go back to their professional career. But it's just one organization, and I see you being a complementary platform. And I'm very interested to see how we can partner in terms of with universities. And I can tell you, for example, in scholarship, I started to advocate for non-certificates programs, because the government, the federal government in the US say that if you are coming with a college degree, you cannot get financial aid. But your first degree is not transferable. Many doctors, pharmacists, agriculturalists, many people who have to go back to school, and you pay thousands and thousands. So I just want to talk to you academics, and this is what I was telling in my video, that I'm a practical person. We have to work together to see what exactly, do you have any scholarship? Can you elaborate programs when, for example, I come as an agriculturalist? What do I have to do? What test I have to do? What adjustment I have to do? What mentorship I need so I can really benefit my community as soon as possible? So I am very, very excited. And one of the things also I can tell you and I was honored to participate in this initiative. So before a new government administration come in the US, they get a report about the analysis of the refugee settlement program. We have what we call Resettlement 2.0, and I was honored to participate in that initiative. And we saw that the refugees' voices, even if we were represented to conduct that study so we can suggest a report to the government, we were underrepresented, but I'm glad that Refugee Council USA and ECDC, in collaboration with the Refugee Congress, now they come up with a study to see what integration means for refugees. And the refugee leaders will lead this initiative. So it's good to be around the table, and why I am very also proud of presenting, being part of the panel, presenting to the federal government agencies, PRM and the Office of Refugee Resettlement, and that report about the Resettlement 2.0. They heard our voices. Now, for example, I want to tell you that we did tell them that there is a big need of community outreach, because the program was about to be dismantled and there are a lot of ignorance and misinformation in our communities. So in proposing the budget now, we will plan for somebody, a staff member in charge of outreach, and we are given money for capacity building of the organization and the communities. So it was very good that I was part of that. And then we did advocate for the housing. So we did advocate also for the career people need, and how do you get back to professional career, not just go into entry-level position, but how do they help you to grow and go back to professional career. So I can go on and on and on, but it's good to have this kind of thing. And then another thing I'm passionate about is like building refugees, other leaders. If I am not here today, who will be there tomorrow? And I am also pro inviting organization to hire refugees in different positions. And I'm glad that I hired two, one speaking Kirundi and Kinyarwanda, and one speaking the language Swahili, because we are resettling many people speaking Swahili, so people can relate. And the organization also can gain more money and time, because you do not have to go back to interpreters. But one of the things I want to see also happening is we are advocating for people to have interpretation services budget line in the budget. Even for people who are getting federal funding, it's not obvious that they have that budget line in that. So as an advocate, as a former refugee, and I cannot be proud to just be an advocate and ambassador of them. But also, I think one of the things I kept growing, because when they told me that I have to go back to school so I can work at university or other places, I said, no, I have enough knowledge. And now I did some self-development, and I am announcing that I am becoming a public speaker. I want to cash on my stories. And this Saturday, I will launch officially my website. So if you need speakers, you know how to get to me. And I want also to be a coach. I am writing a book, From Exile to Executive, and I want to share with refugees and other immigrants some tips how to get integrated so they don't delay where I delayed. So I just want to make big impact, and having other coaches. But as somebody said, refugee stories are powerful, but sometimes I think there is exploitation around that. So as you talk about heritage, intellectual heritage, I think refugees also can be paid and benefit from those stories, and they can be empowered also to become professional in storytelling. Yeah, I can stop there, and I will continue to reply to your questions.
Thank you, Drusilla. Thank you for giving us some concrete examples of how you have integrated refugee voices and advocated for programs that support and integrate refugee voices in the resettlement and integration field. So encouraging folks in the few minutes that we have to put any questions that you have in the Q&A. And I'm going to jump over to Halima and ask, what are some of the challenges that you have faced or you see in doing this kind of work in terms of integrating refugee voices, and what is needed to achieve this?
Great loaded question, Craig. I think that in Drusilla sharing her experiences and her testimony with us, we see what those challenges are in like really tangible ways. I think maybe I'll start with the latter. I believe that it really begins with like a slow tide organizational and attitudinal culture shift. To shift it from like, we are providing these people X, Y, Z to these people are here, like, you know, these communities are here. How can we support them in what they need and what they want? It's a very different approach from, I think, what we have now. And I think that cultural shift goes from, I work in refugee resettlement, but all the way back to like the protection and the international organizations that provide these statuses in the UN, UNHCR, from that perspective. So I think that's a very large scale, but I guess we can go in different scopes. So I think that's, first of all, like really, really important, because unless we shift how we think about what we're doing, then it's going to repeat the same cycles. No matter how like we might insert X, Y, Z, it's still working within the same system. So I think with that organizational shift, it will hopefully, there would be a slight change in how things are presented, how it's funded, and how it's actually administrated. So I think that's like on a larger level. I think the second thing is through, so in that shift, there will be a reimagining and an education that's happening. And for us to be able to think like creatively and innovatively about how we do this work. I think all of the answers are present for like what we need. It's just how we actually go about finding them and collaborating with people. And as Drusilla said, incorporating the people of whom these things are essentially for. So it's not just a recipient, the recipient and the giver relationship. I think if we look at refugee resettlement and integration from a framework of how other communities in the US were displaced and migrated and kind of resettled in the US, we can learn what works and what doesn't and apply some similar approaches. And I guess what I mean by this is, I think if we look at the Great Migration in the US, it's basically the largest internal displacement and one of the largest historical phenomenons we've had in this country, where over 6 million African Americans who were displaced and relocated to the West and the North over the course of 55 years. There are some shared experiences and reasons why like African Americans had to flee the South. And there's shared strategies and for homemaking and justice for African Americans and refugees that I think that we can look at and kind of base our approach and how we work. And a lot of those things were, as Drusilla said, it was very informal. Like, so, you know, when you receive the status of a refugee in this country, you get a small amount of money towards your resettlement. That didn't happen for people who essentially are not granted refugee status. And that didn't happen for African Americans. It was through mutual aid, community support, partnerships, and over time that really helped people resettle, and also to change laws to make space for themselves and others. So I think that like through looking at these examples, looking through history, and then also collaborating, not just with newcomers, but also people who are experiencing similar things. Like Drusilla was saying, like housing, education, there's existing partnerships and organizations who are also doing these work. So having those intersections, I think only strengthens the support and the services supporting refugees or forced migrants, but everybody in the community. So it won't be an us and them. You know, it's us. We're all here. We need X, Y, Z. So I believe that that's some of the ways that we can kind of address some of the barriers for how people aren't, for how refugees aren't fully integrated within essentially the services that are for them. We really can look back in history, particularly in this country, in the US, of what has worked and what hasn't worked as far as looking at things from like a justice perspective, because that's how in this country change has come about through like social justice movements. So that's like, those are like broad approaches, but I think that Drusilla spoke specifically about individual ones through academia, through community support, through advocacy, through making sure that that refugees are in all positions, but particularly leadership. I think that this is really, really important. I've seen examples where it was lacking and how there had to be a double back, or we wonder, oh, why didn't that work? Well, maybe that wasn't the best approach for the people that we're serving. How about we ask them and incorporate them within developing that plan and then working from that way. So those are my like top line thoughts for such a large ask, Craig.
Thank you for taking on that large ask. We will turn over the conversation. We could be here all day, having interesting and stimulating conversation around this. We'll turn over to Anita and the humanitarian panel to continue and further our conversation on how do we share the platform. Over to you, Anita.
Well, thank you, Drusilla and Halima and Craig, for that really stimulating exploration of the refugee resettlement sector in the United States, and more broadly, integration as a concept and as a shared action. We're turning now to the share the platform conversation with regards to the humanitarian relief sector. And we're really delighted today to welcome Rahul Mitra, who is the Economic Recovery Manager with Danish Refugee Council based in Amman, Jordan. We did have a second panelist for this humanitarian panel as well, Adam Abdelmoula, who is the Assistant UN Secretary General, Deputy Special Representative of the Secretary General and Resident and Humanitarian Coordinator for Somalia. But Adam was unable to join us today due to his very important work and the circumstances in Somalia right now. He was called to the field and was unable to be with us. However, we're extremely grateful to Samia Qumri, who is an Amman-based research consultant with United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, UNICEF, and other organizations working with refugees and other displaced people in Jordan, for her video contribution to the panel. So first, we're going to hear from Samia, her pre-recorded message to us, and we'll use that as a jumping off point for Rahul and I to discuss his and Samia's perspectives on sharing the platform in the humanitarian context.
Hello everyone, my name is Samia Khumri, I'm from Jordan. I've been working in the humanitarian sector for the past 15 years. I want to thank you, Anita, for inviting me and inviting my thoughts and ideas to be shared, for convening this impressive and exciting event. And to the platform team, also thanking Rahul for his mind-tweaking thoughts, ideas, and his impressive work. His team, DRC team, what they've been doing in the Middle East and in Jordan. What I want to invite you all, before starting talking and discussing, sharing ideas, to look at the world with a new lens. What the humanitarian system means, how we can reform it, because listening to the critiques, there are lots of critiques going on, and how we better serve the people, the communities, which our work is focused around. The world is getting smaller, but with bigger problems. So let's look at how we can join forces, how we can involve the people. We are talking about the new emerging actors, how we partner with new actors. We have academia, we have private sector, we have the media, faith-based organizations. They are not merely actors in a way for advocacy only, raising awareness or funding. They can be real partners in this. We change how we change the mindset, how we change the power shift. And my idea is how we focus, how we speak more about contexts, how we share from contexts, lessons learned. There are lots of critiques, as I said, in the current system. Decolonizing the system, engaging more the global south, even though I'm not in favor of dividing the work or the globe into north and south, because we are one. How we implement our projects, how we design our projects, inclusive, holistic, how we empower and give people or the communities we are serving and designing our programs, give them the ownership, how they become partners. They are partners, in fact, and not simply recipients. Talking about collaboration, coordination, and transparency in this system. It's true, we are trying to involve and include voices, but still so much talk about it. It's more, as I said, the power shift. It's more engaging the donor countries, because the system relies on donor countries. But how the financing and the funding simply not goes to these high, big international organizations. We need to work with the local, national actors. They are and have proved themselves for the past year, 2 years since the epidemic, that they can be real partners, not simply implementing partners, as we call. We rely on them. They know the context. So simply these are small ideas, small thoughts to share with you, to nudge the talk tomorrow. Thank you again, Anita and everyone. Good luck. And I want to say Happy Eid al-Fitr to those observing and celebrating tomorrow. Thank you so much.
Thank you. And to our audience as well, Happy Eid al-Fitr. I am really taken by some of Samia's analysis of the humanitarian sector at sort of an inflection point. There seems to be, as she said, some new ideas, some critiques that are actually being acted on that really resonate with some of the frameworks that other of our panels laid out in terms of including participation in decision-making and participation not just as beneficiaries, but actually as active, taking a more active role in implementing programs. And so, Rahul, I wonder if you could talk a little bit from your perspective in the humanitarian sector about how some of those more inclusive, more expansive frameworks are actually taking shape on the ground for you and your colleagues.
Definitely. I think there is sort of a movement in the humanitarian sector towards towards some of the ideals that the Share the Platform sort of movement is going towards. But there has never been, in my perspective, a better time to sort of discuss the future of the humanitarian sector in general. And honestly, who gets to have a say as we chart the future of our entire sector? Right, the number and the severity of humanitarian crises are just growing around the world. And it's a trend that we will just continue seeing evolve over the next couple of years and decades. And as more people are now sort of displaced than ever since World War II, and with the rapidly changing climate, I think more migration and conflict is just so bound to happen, right? And I think, as you were saying, the traditional view of seeing displaced individuals, refugees, IDPs, and otherwise, as beneficiaries or silent recipients of aid is gradually shifting. And this is not just here in Jordan, but also globally. Here in Jordan, 1 out of every 10 person identifies as a refugee. There's also others who are not provided with the refugee status or who are internally displaced. There's migrant workers. There are also asylum seekers here. And the Syrian refugee crisis in itself is in its 10th decade. The average refugee spends over 10 years now displaced. So it's not a temporary problem. And I think the solutions should not be of temporary nature. They need to look at the whole problem as in a holistic manner and come up with a multifaceted response. So I think this conversation is shifting towards one of response to individual needs, towards more of a longer term self-reliance. We don't just want the displaced individuals amongst us to survive, we want them to thrive, right? And it's ever so important to bring in a diverse area of voices, particularly amongst the populations that we try and serve as we chart the pathway towards sort of self-reliance and recovery. I think just globally in the humanitarian sector, there's been a shift away from an outputs-based thinking to one of more outcomes and true impact, right? I think, and some of those influences are sort of being nudged all forward by donors as well as governments, implemented by humanitarian organizations such as the Danish Refugee Council here in Jordan. There's sort of a more understanding of the complexity of the refugee situation, right? Humanitarian aid is not as simple as providing food to those who are hungry, providing shelter to those who do not have shelter. It's sort of a very multifaceted need that a lot of refugees and displaced, particularly globally, face. And the trend is towards longer term approaches that addresses the multiple needs that households have. And in doing so, we just need to be very mindful of what services we provide and are we bringing in the voices of those that we are serving, right? Humanitarian development organizations engage currently the people that we serve in determining the type of assistance that we do, sort of through an assessments and analysis that I think Samia mentioned a little bit. However, we need to make sure that any service that we provide is culturally appropriate and provides dignity to the ones that we serve. And it takes into consideration this myriad of human as well as community factors that we are, as humanitarians, are not attuned to. Who better to sort of define the assistance that we provide than the ones who are actually living through it, who have firsthand experience of the challenges and the opportunities that are in offer. Jordan has sort of an interesting humanitarian landscape because, as I mentioned, it's not just the Syrian refugees, there are Iraqi refugees. There are Palestinian refugees as well as citizens who have been in a position of displacement for over 50 years now. There's also Yemenis, Iraqis, Sudanese, whose voices are not as prominently heard. And a lot of that is because of the direction that the donors and organizations go towards, right? So yes, there is a shift, there's a sort of movement towards the sort of share the platform statement, but more needs to happen. And hopefully we're gonna see more of that happening in the next few years.
Right. So Rahul, this is so interesting. And I think it also taps into what Samia was describing about the role of donor countries, not just the big organizations, but the donor countries themselves. And I think one of the things that we had talked about earlier was that the Share the Platform movement or idea has not quite extended to the area of programmatic policy and decision-making levels. So, I was asking you, I think, who are your refugee decision-maker colleagues in Danish Refugee Council? And you had to think a minute. So I'm just wondering where you see any movement in terms of real, not only on the ground, but how these humanitarian agencies and how donor countries actually think about forced migration and humanitarian situations, as you say, which are expanding and part of every society.
Right. To be honest with you, I think thus far we have not seen refugees been equally represented in the humanitarian organizations, particularly I would say at the leadership levels, right? I think the leadership structures in this sector, as well as pretty much any other sector, tends to be predominantly white and tends to be predominantly male. And this obviously needs to change, not just because of the benefits of diversity and listening to diverse voices, but echoing what Halima mentioned before, who better to decide policy and program design than the people who have lived an experience of displacement, right? So we're seeing a movement towards localization in some countries, particularly in the Middle East and Sub-Saharan Africa, but there is no set structure for it. There's no accountability framework around it. Localization means hiring of locals, but what that really means is still sort of vague and left to interpretation, right? What we want to understand here in Jordan is locals means refugees too, right? Particularly in an organization such as the one that I serve. It's not just Jordanians or expats, it's also the refugees, as I mentioned. Localization also does not mean shifting away from international NGOs to local NGOs. It means also necessarily sort of empowering refugee-led and refugee-owned sort of entities itself. So there's a lot of work to be done. And honestly, I think we need to keep pushing these organizations, right? We need to have platforms or structures that we can measure progress in terms of which organizations are following best practices in promoting people and giving incentive to refugees and displacement affected individuals. And then also potentially reward those that are actually doing a good job, right? And I'm glad that Share the Platform, this movement is allowing for that discussion to at least be initiated, and we shall see how it emerges.
Thanks, Rahul. So in addition to lack of awareness that we, I think we're hopefully addressing in our little small way with the Share the Platform initiative, what other kinds of obstacles can you see that might need some thinking around, and basically also bringing people from a forced migration or refugee background to the table to help us unpack some of these obstacles that, for example, are making it, are leading to a sort of a real, not leading to, there is a distinct lack of participation, especially at these higher decision-making levels. So what else can we as audience members think about in terms of obstacles that will help us unpack the problem so that we can think about how to move forward?
Definitely. I think everyone has a role to play in this, right? As humanitarian organizations in recruiting and promoting those voices within the decision-making bodies in our organizations, but also academia has a role in sort of promoting this sector to refugees, and then obviously training them to be successful humanitarians and development practitioners, right? And I think there needs to be some of that bridging from extending the training to refugees, and then obviously promoting them for inclusion in humanitarian organizations. We need to, as I was mentioning before, we need to support refugee-run organizations. In the aftermath of COVID-19, first the health crisis and then the economic crisis, we saw that a lot of the small refugee-run organizations were the first to respond here in Jordan. And they demonstrated amazing sort of agility as well as proficiency in how they went about doing their business. So why are we only investing in international NGOs and governments, right? Like, why are we not recognizing that the people who are displaced, they have the knowledge, they have the information, they have the access to be able to better serve their communities. And I think we see an opportunity there, but thus far we haven't seen a well-concerted movement towards investing in that opportunity, right?
Thanks, Rahul. I see a very interesting comment from Chris Dolan from the Refugee Law Project in Uganda, who has also agreed that some of these, the system itself, with its emphasis on individual beneficiaries, makes any kind of organizing quite challenging. And on top of that, international organizations they tend to follow the funding rather than building capacity maybe in places. So I wonder if you can speak to that a little bit. I think it's a well-known critique of the NGO sector. So what can we do to pressure a change of heart in that regard?
That's a really good question, and something that I think we all as humanitarians grapple with, right? A lot of our interventions follow the funding, as you mentioned, right? The funding dictates the direction that we go towards, but we can choose to be sort of innocent bystanders of donor as well as government policies, or we can actively promote and improve their understanding of refugee needs as well as refugee donor organizations, right? And I think over time, we need to do more advocacy. We need to do more advocacy at the local government level, but also amongst our donor communities that, while as a humanitarian representing an organization that's Danish, that's working here in Jordan, responding to the needs of Syrian refugees and Iraqi refugees and Yemenis, we see that there is a movement amongst the refugee communities in organizing and really focusing on the voices that have thus far been unheard. And I think if we can come up with at least a messaging around this that makes sense for the donor community, for governments, we shall see the funding sort of pave the path for those voices to be amplified, right? I think it's easier said than done, to be honest with you, but we need to start somewhere, and this is the platform to do so.
Right. Oh, Rahul, thank you so much for these important perspectives and for sharing both the positive directions that the humanitarian sector is going and laying out some of the work that needs to be done. I think now I'm going to welcome. So thank you for joining us in the panel on the humanitarian sector. And we'll move now to our final discussion, where we will be hearing a conversation between the president of the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, Christina Clark-Kazak, and former board member of IASFM, Ayar Atta. And what I think is a fantastic role that IASFM plays is as a representative of all of the different refugee sectors that we've been hearing from today. So without further ado, let me turn over to Christina and Ayar to talk about the framing of incorporating and sharing the platform across all of the different sectors that we've been sharing with you today. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much, Anita. So my name is Christina Clark-Kazak, and I'm coming to you today from the unceded territory of the Algonquin people in Ottawa, Canada. But Ayar and I are representing the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration, which, as Anita says, represents researchers across these different sectors and really seeks to engage in knowledge production and dissemination that centers refugee and migration perspective. I wanted to thank Anita and all the organizers today for inviting us and for inviting IASFM to partner on this really important initiative. And I hope that we can think about next steps together about how we can really implement some of the great ideas that came out of today's session. I also just want to acknowledge the background work that Matthew has put into making today a success. I've organized many of these things, and I can tell you that the fact that we haven't had any major problems means that Matthew's doing a very good job behind the scenes. So thank you, Matthew. So and I have the very unenviable task of trying to summarize all of the richness and diversity of perspectives today. And I can just tell you from the very beginning that I am not going to do a good job, but I'm going to try. And I think if I can summarize this in one word, maybe because I'm a critical feminist scholar, I think it's all about power, really. We're talking about power, and we're talking about the where operates and circulates, and means that some individuals are privileged within power structures, and the way in which we can not only share, but I really like this idea of co-producing knowledge. So I picked up on a few different themes. So IR and I have decided that we're going to try to each speak to some of the go into more of a dialogue. So some of the themes that I picked up again under this overarching notion of power are, first of all, remuneration. So ISFM has a code of ethics, which we recently adopted. And in our code of ethics, we very explicitly state that those people who usually benefit from refugee knowledge and information around migration don't have a personal experience of forced migration. So people like myself who are privileged. And I think that the notion of remuneration, which Drashella and others have talked about today, is really important. And we have a responsibility to what we do is not exploitative, and that those people who are sharing their stories and knowledge and talents are appropriately compensated for that time and valued for that time and experience. The second issue, and IR really launched at the very beginning and has continued throughout the conversation, is around issue of representation and self-representation, and who decides how categories are constructed and the labeling associated with those categories. So I really appreciated earlier when you talked about being a Londoner and a Kurdish Londoner, and how those identities really shape the way you are and how you want to choose when you're being referred to as a refugee or Kurdish or a Londoner. And I think that, for those of us who are trying to be invited allies into this process, we really need to be careful about the way in which we deconstruct particular categories and the representation that comes with that, but also the notion of ownership. So ownership over the stories and over the ways in which people represent and self-represent, I think is really important when we're thinking about co-constructing or sharing the platform. A third theme that came out for me is the notion of reciprocity. So I think that, Catherine started with the example of Albert Einstein, and I think it is a helpful and powerful example in showing the contribution that refugees make. But I also think that there's a danger in a sort of utilitarian approach, an approach that really focuses on extract from people, or what talents they're bringing. And I think the notion of reciprocity, which comes for me out of reading more on Indigenous scholarship and Indigenous methodologies and epistemologies, is thinking about human beings as human beings in our own dignity, being in relationship with one another, and how when we the conversation to think about reciprocity in a relationship, it is a two-way and an interactive process. And it's not, as Halima said, about giving a gift or serving other people. It's about shifting the conversation to really thinking about the ways in which we're interacting and engaging in a dialogue. And finally, I think the notion of decision-making really comes out when we center on power and thinking about who is in leadership positions. Why is it that a global North white settler scholar is the president of an international association on migration? This is a problem, I think, and a problem that I acknowledge. We to think about the ways in which, as has been shown by others on today's panels, that refugees can be centered in the leadership positions and can be taking meaningful decisions about the programs, the policies, the research that affects them and is about them. Really like this idea that Cal introduced about co-building. Others have mentioned, Halima and others, about centering. Samaya in her video clip talked about a different perspective or shifting the lens. And I really do think we need to reimagine the way that we do things. And so I'm excited to talk a little about this. And I would also like to address maybe the elephant in the room about the people who are not present here today. And this is where I think those of us who are white settler non-immigrants actually have a role to play in challenging some of our colleagues who don't necessarily this, who don't see a problem with self-promotion and promoting their own agendas, and how we can gently and maybe not so gently call them out when they behave in ways that are not honoring the principles that we've talked about today. So I'll turn it over to IR, and then hopefully we can have a bit of dialogue.
Thank you very much, Christina, for really helping me to organize it, the thoughts, all the interesting talk and debate that we had in the past 2 hours or so. I was, in a word, quite stimulating. Although I am from the field, I have that first-hand experience. But always, when I hear people talk from the field, either from refugee background or known, but really I have seen that positive and caring attitude in the way people present, and they care about really partnership and well-being and peace and unity and better world for all of us. I think that's the starting point for me when I analyze my own thesis, when I present. I just see I am from this world, one world. We're all the same, but it happened that during Iran-Iraq war, for example, I became displaced, first internally, and then lived in refugee camp for 5 or 6 years before, with 10,000 more young people, we had to leave. So that decision to leave is not of the individuals or groups, is the power relationship that there is in this divided and unequal world, and also the decision that the states really make over us. They start the war and then they want to protect us. I think that's a paradox, that I want to come and just see how I feel about state as a whole. But as human beings, I think we can talk, we can share, we can then say all the issues they all constructed politically and socially, we can understand them and then change them for the better. So with this really just a brief introduction about how I go about who I am, and from a former refugee, if you like, or someone, a scholar who studied forced migration, from my own perspective as an insider, if you can say. But I can also say, when I talk to Kurdish women, for example, or women refugees in London, I never felt that I am an insider. I thought they say things about integration, their experience, that I really didn't experience. Therefore, who is really an insider? All of us, we are both insiders in a way, all as human beings, but outsiders, because if you don't experience something specific, you need to really learn it from someone else. So refugees bring in this real experience, real people. And from the talk that I had today, obviously, I think these are the key words for me that I can take away, and I recommend that we think about it more in depth. And building and co-building, obviously, that is important. That is a partnership, and live experiences and multiple voices and changing voices of migrant and refugees, because my voice 20 years ago and my voice now are quite different. You can't just put me in one category. What about my children? My children don't see never been to Middle East, and therefore when they see born in London, therefore they're London by definition, naturally in their right, and therefore they shouldn't be judged by their parents, for example. And that's where what Christina rightly says, the self-representation and the way we go about identify ourselves shouldn't be really up to other people, it's up to us. all of us, how we represent and how we change really. And I think I was really particularly encouraged by the Rosella's daily talk. And then I thought that we really speak the same language, and everything she said, I need to re-record it and then translate it in Kurdish and Farsi. So for my fellow members to listen to. So we're really internationally, geographically in different parts of this world, but we speak the same language, human language, wells, human wells, win-win situations. Because I live in London, obviously I am drawn into history of forced migration in the United Kingdom, but I am also, I draw my attention to talk that obviously in America, African American have those internal displacement and the rich experiences that we can learn. You could become a refugee if you like internally, although we call them now internally displaced. But for me, that's the human movement. If it's forced, it should be forbidden. No one in this world should be forced to leave their home, full stop. And then that is especially for refugee children that I support, that I know, 14, 15-year-old from Afghanistan, from Iraq, from Iran, from Rwanda, from elsewhere, that they are separated and they here and they forced migrant by category. For me, they are children and they happen to be here. Therefore, we need to consider all this labeling and then see the human experience through the lenses of power, the unequal they created for us. We need to sort it through this sort of dialogue and the human and the equal shared platform with everyone. I think I just said that I just share my really honest and sincere explanation of what I've taken away, will take away from today. I rely on my good colleague Christina to then again give concluding, if you like, remarks. I just again show my appreciation for inviting me, being here and reading the chats and then seeing these familiar faces or new faces. It's all energy for me. And thank you very much again, and hope see you face to face in different conferences here and there. All the best.
Thank you, IR. So I think that Anita, or one of the organizers, will make the concluding remarks. I did just want to pick up on one other thing, IR, from your remarks, but also that I think is a theme that runs through, is this notion of time. I mean, my work focuses on the social construction of age. So I'm interested in time from an individual perspective, but I also think, as Halima and others have said, the time and the history of forced migration, I think, is something that's really important to take into account. And I often think that in our field, especially in the research side, everything is always new. Like we're talking about a new crisis or a new such and such. And in fact, there is a historical trend of discrimination and power relations that actually feed into the way in which people interpret immigration and interpret it as a threat or a benefit, or however they do so. So I think that this is really important, the historical and the time-bound aspect of it. But I hope that in terms of next steps, I mean, we can really think concretely about how we, for lack of a better word, I used to be a public servant, you can tell, operationalize this, because I think we've come up with a lot of really great points, but I also feel like practically, and this was one of the ways, I mean, we've come up with a statement on anti-racism, we've come up with a statement on a code of ethics. I think it would be really helpful to have some kind of statement that members can sign on to say, yes, we're committed to co-creating or co-production or sharing, or however we want to frame it, the platform. And here are some of the principles of good practice that we can, start to try to incorporate or build on the great work that has already been done. So I really think that in terms of next steps, it would be helpful to build on this momentum and continue the conversation. So I'll also end there and turn it over to the organizers.
Thank you, Christina and IR, for summarizing what we've discussed today, and then setting the stage for the next steps. So on behalf of our Share the Platform team, I would like to express our appreciation to our conversationalists, our panelists, for their valuable contribution to this very important topic of exploring various approaches in valuing and centering refugees' voices and knowledge and expertise. I want to thank our co-sponsors, Clark University, Fairfield University, Proof, which was in partnership with the International Association for the Study of Forced Migration and the Refugee Law Project. Without them, this could not be possible. I want to also thank our technical support staff, Matthew and Anthony, who have done a tremendous work in pulling off this venture. And our deepest gratitude to all our attendees, our symposium attendees. Without you, this event would not be successful. I do encourage you to go to visit our website at sharetheplatform.org to learn more about us, to join our network, and to take the pledge. Also, follow us on social media on Instagram, LinkedIn, Facebook, and Twitter to learn more about future events that we will have and to keep updated with all the work and the continuing conversation that we will have. This is just an initial conversation, so please stay tuned to hear more from us. And thank you for being with us, and do enjoy the rest of your day.